Welcome, friends, to the third episode of our podcast, Thoughts on the Edge, with my co host, Reinaldo Torres. Obviously, lots to discuss today, given the election. As of now, no winner has been declared yet for the presidency of the United States. So lots at stake as the numbers keep coming in. There's a funny meme circulating that with Groundhog Day, basically saying, right, election day again. So we're in on our third day of elections here as we still await results. With that being said, lots to discuss, lots to anticipate. And so Reynaldo is going to take us away with party affiliation and this pesky problem of my party's better than your party, right? And what that does for identity and what that does for conversation and friendships.
It's just something that I heard during election night. A friend of mine posted, no matter who gets in office, I don't care who's in office. What I do care about is this idea, this logic that my political affiliation makes me better than you, or I'm better than you because I voted, Republican, or because I voted Democrat. Let it be known, yes, I am wearing a blue shirt today, but that is not a nod to the Democrats. That's not a jug at Republicans. It has nothing to do with that. My point about this logic is, what does it solve? If you were a successful business owner during Obama's administration, your business survived during Trump's administration, your business survived during the COVID crisis, and you're still successful, how is your business going to fail because another president is elected? If that's the case, that means every time a president is elected, your business should have failed in some way. Is your life really going to change all that much? Your political affiliation does not make you a better person. Because I know there are some Democrats who are arrogant as I don't know what. There are some good Republicans out there. So I just think that this logic of my political affiliation makes you somehow better is just stupid to me. It doesn't even make any sense. And the fact that we've actually gotten to this point where people believe that says a lot about who we are as a nation, who you are as a person.
Well, and I also think there's something to be said about being a political junkie, for example, right? Which is, with the media kind of, whether it's CNN, whether we're talking about Fox News, they're very big on keeping you hooked.
Yeah.
Whether it's through sensationalism, of course, right? We know the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true of politics as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking to myself, Fox News, CNN, sometimes we just have to turn it off.
Yeah.
And focus on one conversation at a time. And I think that's the problem, right? That the way the media has set us up, it's a sum-zero game where if you're Republican, that means de facto that there's nothing that we can get along on if I'm a Democrat.
Yeah.
And I think that's what needs to change, right? It's the whole, we can't talk to each other. That whole mentality. Yes, we can. For example, one of my good friends, Republican.
Yeah.
And do we disagree on most things? Yes, but do we also agree on many things, including some social issues? Absolutely. Right. So it's a matter of conversation and hashing it out. But media has prevented us from actually getting together to talk.
I think that the media, and it's so funny that you bring up the media, because I think that the media has done an excellent job with COVID and with the election of just dividing, of creating and furthering that divide. I have plenty of Republican friends who, throughout the course of the election, throughout the course of COVID, they've never messaged me or called me and said, "You're a Democrat, you're a terrible person." I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who is a Republican, and he was saying how, yes, he's a Republican, but he's not voting for Trump this term. He voted for Trump the first term, but he's not voting this term because he's sick of the rhetoric. His wife is a Democrat, so you know where she's going. His father voted Republican and has been a Republican for years, but he's tired of the rhetoric. But as you say, the media doesn't want to hear people in agreement with each other. They don't want to hear that. They don't like that. They want to further that divide between people and create it to where we can't agree with each other. And like I said, like you say, that's what has to change.
Now, that being said, Trump adds a different quality
Mm.
to party affiliation that I
Mhm.
think most people don't feel comfortable discussing. We know what Trump represents. And again, right, we're not going to spend this episode bashing Trump.
Mhm.
But I do think that Trump's, again, xenophobic, racist, anti immigrant, anti woman sentiments, right, make it it's just, he's a different beast when it comes to support, right? And tolerating certain people who support him,
Mhm.
right? So I guess there's a different quality to that. I was speaking to a law professor friend of mine, and he said that he's had to cut some relationships, not because they're Republican, but because by supporting Trump and his ugly rhetoric, these people are taking on and embodying that rhetoric, right? And embodying those ideologies, which just have no place in a democracy. We're talking here about fascist kind of ideologies, right? Of hating certain groups, scapegoating certain groups, preventing certain groups from voting, as we see. We see people in Arizona lining up outside, of where they're counting ballots. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is ridiculous. All
Mhm.
ballots must be counted. That's been the backbone of democracy, right?
Mhm.
Each vote counts. So to
Regardless.
have people saying, oh, the results are not in our favor, so let's go and mob a place and try to intimidate the people counting the ballots, that to me is, clear fascism. But that's what he represents. So when we talk about party affiliation, yes, it's important to separate, you know, Democrat, Republican, and we know that there's corruption on both sides. We know that there are good and bad people on both sides.
Yes.
But Trump himself just represents a whole different breed, right? Of kind of the neo-fascist, alt-right kind of theories, right? It's and he doesn't refute things. The whole Proud Boys stand down and stand by. Thinking to myself, what is that? I've never seen a president say to a hate group, stand by. So it's he's a different type of breed. Now, that being said, I will thank Trump for something. I will thank Trump for exposing, right, the ugliness of America and for emboldening people to come out, because now we know where people stand. And as Malcolm X said, I have more respect for somebody who stands for something, right? Even if I'm fundamentally against it, than for somebody who presents himself or herself as an angel and then does the opposite. So that being said, thank you, Trump, for emboldening people to just say what they are, and express themselves. And now we know where people stand, and that, I think that's actually a positive moving forward. Yes, is it divisive at the time? Absolutely.
Mhm.
Can it cause violence? Yes. But to move forward, I think we need to get past the people hiding who they really are, and so now he's exposing that. So
And to another point, something that I've seen is the last couple days, you've probably heard this even before the campaign, of people saying, well, I'm just outright not going to vote this year because I don't like either Biden nor Trump. Or, yeah, I'm just not going to vote. And my issue is, but then you complain about the outcome. Don't complain about the outcome if you didn't get to the polls and vote. You had your chance to be a part, to do your part to make change, and you didn't do it. So you have no elbow, leg, any type of room to talk about the outcome that you didn't participate in. That part is something that also irritates me too, is people say, well, my vote didn't, my one vote won't make a difference. Really? Because as we see with the results that are coming in constantly, leads are shrinking, leads go up, leads go down, numbers, they do the roller coaster effect. So when you say, oh, my vote won't count, do you know that for certain?
yeah, I think, and to be fair too, voting is, especially, I'm thinking of people who live in counties where intimidation is a possibility, right? And I think the mail-in ballots, yes, are they annoying in terms of it takes more time now to tally them up and to know the results? Absolutely. But I think that's going to be the future of voting in this country, right? Regardless of whether there's another pandemic or, anything that prevents people from showing up. I think mail-in ballots now, that's going to be the future, and I would hope to see. I was thinking this last night, right? We live in a pretty advanced country, technologically speaking. And here we are still counting votes, 3 days after. So I'm thinking that there needs to be some type of reform also moving forward with voting and with how votes are counted and tallied. Making sure, of course, that safeguards are in place, right? Because we don't want, our democracy to be hacked as it possibly was in 2016. So it's important, I think, to acknowledge that many people feel hesitant to vote just because of intimidation and because they do note that corruption is a possibility. And, so I think it's important to acknowledge, right, all the narratives that are here. And at the same time, yes, absolutely, urging people to vote and making sure that they don't, just complain without voting, right? As Obama says, don't boo, go vote. Otherwise, what are we doing?
Yeah, it's very important. And I'm especially proud of our young people for getting out and really taking a stand in this election. Um, because as I was telling someone the other day, someone asked me, why did you decide to start the podcast? And I said, well, as a young person, as a young African American man, time and time again, we're always accused of not speaking up, of not using our voices enough. We don't say anything. We just brush it under the rug. Here I am the last 4 weeks that we've been doing this podcast, and I'm using my voice. So my hope is that by me using my voice on this platform, it will inspire someone else to do the same. But like I said, I am really proud of our young people for getting out and using their voice and exercising their right to vote. A lot of us, yeah, we are afraid because there is intimidation, there is corruption, there is so much injustice happening in the world today. So you have the right to be a little hesitant, a little afraid of what's going on, because you want to make sure that your voice is heard. You want to make sure that your your vote is counted. And you don't want to be put in a situation where, because you speak up and you use your voice, you're followed home, or you're assaulted, or you're beat up because of what you believe in. We've seen enough of that for years, and that's something that we're tired of, right? So, like I said, I applaud everyone for making their vote and their voice count this year, because it really did make a difference.
Of course, and we know the history of civil rights, right? What it took for the women's suffrage movement, what it took for, African Americans to vote. So yes, there's a legacy there, right? That you're carrying on by voting. That sitting on the shoulders of giants, right, so to speak. All right, so let's change it up here and talk about something that has been circulating. What do you make of the support by rappers? So we have Lil Wayne taking a picture, right? We have Lil Pump, I think his name is, who Trump referred to as Little Pimp. And then we have Ice Cube, who was once a leader, right? Or once a voice of resistance back in the 90s. I mean, he hasn't been, he's been considered a sellout since the mid 90s, but early 90s, he was a powerful voice. Of course, he was behind NWA's F the Police. He was his first album, America's Most Wanted, with 3Ks, says a lot, like, that he spelled it that way with 3Ks. I mean, this was Ice Cube back then, right? So what do you make of these three? Two out of the three at least are very prominent rappers, Ice Cube and Lil Wayne. What do you make of their support of Trump and this platinum plan for the Black community?
I'll honestly say that growing up, I didn't follow rap music very much. I will self-confess to anybody, I was raised on smooth jazz, I was raised on R&B, I was raised on, the OJs and Sade, so I really didn't follow rap much. I I still don't. Even at 30 years old, I still don't very much. There are certain songs that I listen to, but that's not the music of my choice, I should say. So when I first saw it, I thought, hey, okay, he's supporting Trump. Again, the logic of how is this affecting my life is my immediately thought. Okay, Ice Cube supports Trump. 50 Cent also said something in support of Trump. How does this affect my life? A guy that has multiple zeros in his bank account, that has no real impact on how my bills are going to get paid, on, you know, anything really. Okay, if that is who you choose to vote for, that's who you choose to vote for. You know, I know a lot of I know a lot of my friends that I talk to, African Americans, who were angered by it because they're like, he's a black man. What is he doing? You know?
And I guess it's not only that, right? It goes kind of it goes beyond that, right? It's not just the our phenotype, right? The skin color and who we support. It's the hypocrisy. So you have all of these rappers, right? Talking about, for example, when they used to do interviews, like talking about justice or talking about the corruption of the system and the white man is evil, and here they are supporting a candidate, right? A president whose policies have fundamentally been shown to stand against all the interests of all minority communities, and even of poor working white people. It's just they don't recognize it, right? Because the Trump campaign has done a very good job since 2016 of harnessing the anger, right, of the white working class community. And actually, there's a great book called Angry White Men, written by sociologists, that talks about this, right? How the Trump campaign harnessed anger. And as you said, that's partly the Democrats' fault, right, for kind of ignoring that population and demeaning that population, right? And we see the results. They came together, they galvanized around a certain candidate, Trump, and they led to his election, right? Including that and the white evangelical vote. They coalesced to vote. So it's interesting to see Ice Cube particularly. And again, I grew up listening to Ice Cube, right? And I took all his music off Spotify because I'm thinking to myself, and he also had a song called Arrest the President that he recorded 2 years ago. So now here he is aligning himself, or and again, it's not. I respect the fact that yes, he might be trying to reach out and bridge things, but for a leader, or what people considered to be a leader, right, of resistance in the tradition of Malcolm X, to be reaching out like this and to kind of play into it, it just shows what you're saying, right? At the end of the day, who cares? You're absolutely right, but they do influence. There's no denying that rappers, athletes, celebrities,
Of
they
course.
have an influence. Look at LeBron James's influence.
Yes.
There's an influence there. So who's holding them accountable, right? Number one.
Mhm.
And do I appreciate them speaking their minds? Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of our democracy. But then don't come back and say you're an ally or a friend of certain communities, because obviously it's your interests that are more at stake,
Mhm.
right, than the interests of your community, right? And there's something to be said about being a celebrity and also being out of touch with the reality of day-to-day people. And I think that's ultimately what it is, right? And you have to remember too that Trump is an entertainer first and foremost. I think he wanted to be an actor, and when that didn't take off, because we saw his very limited roles, right, in commercials, and the man can barely dance, and so it's just no talents in terms of acting, but he's a showman. There's no denying that. So I think celebrities gravitate to that, including 50 Cent, right? And of course he made several appearances in rap culture during the 90s. So he's always had that kind of affinity for entertainment. So I think that's what people have to be also aware of, right? That he's an entertainer, he's a con man in some ways. So is his jig up? That's the question.
I think, judging the results, Trump's the jig is up. And I think that is the part that he can't handle, that he's in denial about, is that it's slipping away and it wasn't supposed to be like this. It made me think this morning of the Miami Heat and the LA Lakers doing the playoffs. How everyone thought that it was just going to be easy picking, a sweep for LA to come in and defeat Miami. But Miami fought to the death, tooth and nail. And even though they did not win, they still fought and they still earned the right to be there. Now, in Trump's case, he feels like, I'm unbeatable. I'm untouchable. It's not supposed to happen like this. Like he said on the news the other day, we were winning this election. We had this election. Frankly, we won the election. Really. Because numbers don't lie. Just
Well,
like, you know,
and do you remember? Do you remember how he started running? Do you remember? I mean, he started getting his political voice in by doubting Obama's origins of birth. I mean, you know,
mhm,
his place of birth,
mhm,
saying that he wasn't, you know, the whole birther conspiracy, right? And so that's what's always concerned me, that for all that's said about conspiracy theories,
mhm.
people actually apparently take them very seriously. You know, so what do you make of I mean, so should Democrats just start saying, hey, you know, aliens are coming tomorrow and, you know, you have to vote for us? So, I mean, there's no logic, right? Conspiracy theories are real to people, you know. So it's by running on this campaign, wasn't it obvious that the man had something, for example, against Obama? You know, is there some type of latent racism there? I think there is. The fact that he can't accept that a black man was president twice, you know, 2 terms, and very articulate, very successful, went to law school, you know, has more of a persona, more of a presence. Again, going back to the entertainment, right? So, you know, there's a bunch of strands that run through it that made it surprising for me, or not, maybe, that he won in 2016, right? To me, he's the logical manifestation, actually, of the American experiment, right? And privilege and all that. Like, and again, the harnessing of the anger toward the gains made by the minority communities. But it's very disheartening when I see Miami-Dade, for example. Usually the numbers are so stretched out, right? But then you have all these Cuban American voters, Venezuelan voters, Colombian voters who turned out for Trump, despite the fact that there are kids in cages who are coming from Latin America. So why the disconnect? That's what I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around.
I think everyone, to answer that question, would probably need a PhD or two and probably still wouldn't be able to figure it out. Um, and it's so funny that you mentioned Hispanic voters in Miami-Dade County, because I have a very good friend of my father's who worked with him uh, for about 2 years, roofing contractor who came over here from Nicaragua, did everything correct, had a business, 3 kids, got married, and last year he was deported back to his country. And to see where he went from, the money he was making over here, very successful roofing business, to now see where he is in Nicaragua, it's just like, wow. It's not even funny, because he has to wait now a year to get back over here. And one of the things that he called my dad the other day, and he was almost in tears, is just that you guys do not understand how good you have it in the United States. Yes, there is corruption on both sides, but the fact of the matter is that people put their lives on the line every single day to come here, to still come here and have a better life. And that was just really, really polarizing to me, because he said, even though I can't vote in the US election, I literally sit down and I literally think, what are some of these people doing? They don't realize how good they have it over here. I've heard so many people say, well, if Biden gets in office, I'm leaving the country. Okay, well, go ahead. Good luck with that. But I guarantee you, where you're going, you're not going to have the same liberties and freedom over there as you do here. I've heard a lot of people say, well, if Biden gets electoral votes in this state, I'm leaving the state. Well, regardless of where you go in the US, he's still going to be president.
To me, right, it's again this disconnect. But you're right. It's coming from international perspectives, I think is very important, right? And I think in the United States, citizens of the US have a hard time thinking internationally. And I think a lot of that has to do, of course, with the domestic kind of the popular nationalism, right? That is very ingrained in the US, right? The patriotism and all that. People just have a hard time seeing that there's a world outside of the United States. And so for me, I one of the things is I take pride, right, in having international friends and having also a background, right, in international law, international studies, global leadership, and I always take the international seriously. Cosmopolitanism to me is very important, right? And so when you hear people's stories, you're absolutely right. People say, we escaped a certain situation that was rough in our countries, and you guys think that this is rioting? No. Or you think that this is political repression? No, right? So as bad as things are in the United States with corruption and all that, you're right. It could be infinitely worse. Now, does that mean, given all that we can't hold, the government accountable, or if we have somebody like 45 in office accountable, or even Joe Biden, So once he's declared victor, which I hope he will be soon, the attention turns now from Trump and what he did to holding Biden and Harris, right? And that administration and the senators accountable for governing the right way.
I think too, there seems to be a disconnection or an illusion that if a Democrat is in office, that we will not hold them accountable, that the people will not hold them accountable. And that's just not true. I voted Democrat, but guess what? If he doesn't deliver on his promises, if Biden and Harris don't deliver on their promises, guess what I'm going to say in 4 years? He's got to go. He didn't do what he promised he would do. And I want to be very, very clear about that. Because I think that there is something to be said about that. People feel as if, though, if a Democrat gets in office, then somehow the Democrats aren't going to hold them accountable. That is not the truth.
No, I think you're right. I think what we'll see going forward here is, and again, right, as controversial as this is going to sound, I think we have to thank Trump for a few things. And I think number one, again, as I said earlier, right, people have come out of the woodwork and they've exposed who they are. So now we know where people stand, and that's good, because now we know how to navigate that. And it's obviously, we know that one of the best weapons for anybody, right, is to conceal, to conceal who they are in order to move in different spaces without anybody exposing them or challenging them. So now we know who people are. We know where they stand for the most part. The other thing I think we have to thank him for, looking back, is there should be now, moving forward, a higher system of accountability for any politician of any racial background, right, of any gender, of any religious affiliation. There needs to be more accountability, and it needs to be without political correctness. We need to be able to say, hey, Joe said certain things 20 years ago that were not necessarily good. So let's hold them accountable. Let's say, hey, Joe, why did you say this? It's time to have these open conversations, right? And I think that's one thing that, given the polarization of our country, people are actually starting to feel more comfortable doing, right, than 15 years ago, where you had to mince words or you had to be careful with what you said. I think politics is now in our face in a way that it's never been, or at least for our generation. Obviously, during the civil rights movement, politics was in your face all the time, right? But now, for our generation, at least since I've been alive, right, I've never seen politics this blatantly in our faces, and religion also, right, this blatantly in our faces, right, and the power of both mixing together, things that we would never talk about it at the dinner table, right? Because it was not considered proper. Now that's out the door. Religion and politics, they're here to stay, and people need to be more engaged civically, right? With these questions. And so I think if anything, the polarization, and this is not Trump, this is just the polarization of our country, has led us to be more literate when it comes to politics and how our government works and operates and the mechanisms right behind it that I haven't seen, at least during my generation, right? And of course, that doesn't mean that everybody's politically aware, but at least the conversation is starting.
Yeah, I think, like I said, we have more of a voice now, and people are starting to use that voice. People are starting to use their platforms for good, for social change and for discussion and for conversation. And as I said earlier, that there's something to be said about that. There's something to be said about politics being in your face, because now people are more vocal about what they don't like, what they like, and even more politely, what they don't care about, right? So that needs to continue moving forward. That way, said party will not be, and yes, it is raining. Sorry if you guys hear that, but there's that needs to continue, because you get to see where people stand. And yes, I will thank Trump for that, is finally getting people to talk and finally getting to to see where you stand on a certain issue. Because never before, in me being alive 30 years, I've never seen this much this much conversation. When Trump got in office, people that I never heard from before suddenly were like,
Well, and that's also the danger, right? Because suddenly now everybody has a PhD in political science, and everybody's now an expert in voting and in politics, and that's also a danger, right? Because that's a false sense of knowledge. None of us have comprehensive knowledge of that extent, right? Even politicians themselves have to figure out on a day-to-day basis how to maneuver government, right, and the politics that come with that. So I think that gets to the heart of it, right? That learning is just a lifelong enterprise, and there needs to be a certain sense of humility when we approach these things. So yes, are there people who are more knowledgeable than others? Absolutely, right? But rather than dismiss that and say, oh, well, this person thinks, no, let's learn from each other. And I think another thing that again, right, that comes out of these last 4 years, and Pope Francis actually hints at this in his latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. He says that every generation, it's up to every generation to continue the struggle for justice. That it does not stop, right? So now I think we're seeing youth, especially, right? Those between the ages of 15 to 32 or 34, but specifically from 15 to 24, I see the hunger for justice, right? You see it in terms of environmental justice, you see it for prison reform, you see it for social justice generally, economic justice, gay rights, right? LGBTQ rights. I mean, you just see it from multiple perspectives. You see this hunger. So, perhaps the Trump administration has galvanized people to reassess the situation and say, yeah, things are not as good as they can be. So let's continue this work for justice. Again, building on right, we're sitting on the shoulders of giants from prior generations. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Howard Thurman. I mean, the list goes on, right? Dorothy Day, just the list goes on and on. We're building on them. And so each generation, it's up to each generation to move forward with justice work.
couldn't have said it better myself, even if I tried. I think you're right. It's like I said, we're more outspoken, where a lot of us aren't afraid anymore to speak out. A lot of us have used our platforms and our influence for, to really get out there and make a difference. So no longer it's this rhetoric, this logic of, oh, well, they're not going to speak out. They're not going to say anything. They're misguided. They're disconnected. No, you've seen a movement of millennials, of all ethnic backgrounds. Say, look, if I don't agree with this, this is what I'm going to do about it. If I don't like this, okay, I'm going to speak out and say that I don't like this. If I like this, I'm going to speak out and say, yeah, I like this. Let's keep it going. And as long as we keep that discussion open and we sit down at the table and we discuss these issues, that is what I applaud, and that is what I like to see.
Yes, it needs to be one conversation. I'm going to emphasize this, one conversation at a time, right? And another book I suggest is by Howard Gardner, who became famous in the 80s with his whole theory of multiple intelligences. He has a great book called Changing Minds, right? Talking about how, again, it's not about necessarily changing people's minds. It's about growing, right? And in the process of that growth, we change our own minds and we change other people's minds, right? But I think we need to be receptive to that. That being said, we need to be careful with slipping into type of relativism where it's like, oh yeah, he believes in racism, so I guess that's okay, like, no, it's not, right? There are certain things that put vulnerable people at an even more of a disadvantage, and also leave them open to violence, right? Or to being acted upon in violent ways. So it's necessary to put a halt to certain things, but that's going to take, again, it's going to take empathy, it's going to take compassion. And rather than just say, all right, this person's a racist, let me not engage them. Look, we all have our biases. Each and every one of us has our biases. Recognize it, and then try to meet somewhere, right? And talk about things, and our time is coming to an end, incredibly. So I just want to end with this quote from Ocasio-Cortez, and then, Reinaldo, you can close us out. So she said, referring to Trump, he can stay, he can go. He can be impeached or voted out in 2020. But removing Trump will not remove the infrastructure of an entire party that embraced him, the dark money that funded him, right? The online radicalization that drummed his army, nor the racism he amplified and reanimated, right? I think Representative Ocasio-Cortez is on point with many of the things she says. Of course, she represents, the populist wing, right, of the Democratic Party, more progressive. But I think she's right. I think, again, Trump is the manifestation of the American experiment, especially white supremacy and male privilege. So getting him out is not enough, right? Our generation needs to continue to re-envision, to learn more, and then to have those conversations across aisles, across differences, right? Without trying to convert the other.
Yeah. And I'll just end with this. My post that I posted on Facebook, election night, I said, in every race, there's a winner and there's a loser. Regardless of who wins, there's going to be a new day filled with new opportunities, blessings, and possibilities. Regardless of who wins, we as a people need to focus on unity. Because if we can't master it, how do we expect our leaders to? I think, like I said, that there needs to be more conversations, and not being afraid to have conversations, and be open to friends, family, colleagues having different opinions than you, but be able to sit down at the table and have different opinions about ways to fix an issue and still walk away and still be friends, still be family. Like, don't let something that can be easily resolved by just listening ruin a relationship, ruin a friendship of 12, 15, 20 years. That doesn't make sense. So, like I said, that is all I have to say for today. Thank you guys for supporting us. Thank you guys for joining us along this ride. There's plenty of other conversations where this came from. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. And make sure, if you appreciate what we're doing, make sure to subscribe, right? And also pass it on to other friends, pass the word on of our podcast. And this is our third episode, right? And we're growing slowly. Yes. And, we hope to continue building our presence. And we just thank you for your support. And also make sure to drop comments, whether you agree or disagree. It's healthy to, again, start a conversation.
Yes.
So with that being said, we thank you for listening to us, and let's see what happens.
Thank you.